My name is Gloria Martinez, and I'm 63 years old. I spent my entire adult life building a home, not just a house, but a real sanctuary where love could grow. After my husband Robert died in that terrible car accident, when my son David was only 15, I worked double shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I finally bought our 2-story home in suburban Denver with my insurance money and life savings in 2010. I put my name on those property deeds with such pride, knowing David would always have a place to come home to. When he graduated with his engineering degree and asked to move back temporarily to save money, my heart soared. But sometimes the people you love most can become strangers in your own home. Before I share this story that changed everything, tell me where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own home. Subscribe to hear more stories about the quiet strength women discover when they need it most. Now let me tell you how silence became my most powerful weapon. Looking back, those early years after Robert's death were the hardest of my life. David was just a teenager dealing with his own grief while I juggled 12-hour shifts at Denver General Hospital. Some nights I'd come home so exhausted I could barely heat up a frozen dinner, but David would be waiting with his homework spread across the kitchen table. We'd sit together in comfortable silence, him working on calculus while I paid bills by lamplight. The house hunting process took me 2 years. I must have looked at 50 properties before I found our home on Maple Street. It wasn't the biggest or the fanciest, but it had good bones and a wraparound porch that reminded me of my childhood in Ohio. The real estate agent thought I was crazy, a single mother taking on such a large mortgage, but I knew what I was doing. Every payment came from my own earnings. Every repair I either learned to do myself or saved up to hire professionals. David thrived in high school after we moved in. He had his own room for the first time since Robert died, space to spread out his projects and invite friends over. I loved hearing teenage laughter echo through those halls. When graduation came, followed by his acceptance to Colorado State for engineering, I felt like we'd accomplished something miraculous together. College flew by faster than I expected. David called every Sunday and came home for holidays, but I could sense him growing independent. That was healthy, exactly what I'd raised him to do. When he graduated summa cum laude in 2014, I cried with pride at the ceremony. My boy had become a man despite all our struggles. His request to move back home caught me off guard, but thrilled me completely. "Just temporarily, Mom," he assured me over dinner at his favorite Mexican restaurant. "I want to save up for a really good down payment instead of throwing money away on rent." It made perfect sense financially, and secretly, I was delighted to have him back. The house had felt too quiet for too long. We settled into a wonderful routine that reminded me of his high school days. David took over yard work and small repairs, while I handled cooking and laundry. Evenings meant watching Netflix together or discussing his new job at an engineering firm downtown. He was respectful of my space and schedule, always cleaning up after himself and contributing to groceries without being asked. Then came Stephanie. David met her through a dating app in spring of 2015, and within weeks he was talking about her constantly. She worked in marketing for a tech startup and had an MBA from University of Denver. When he finally brought her home for dinner, I tried my best to make a good impression. She seemed nice enough, though quieter than I'd expected. She picked at my homemade enchiladas and spent most of dinner scrolling through her phone when David wasn't looking. Over the following months, Stephanie became a regular presence. She'd arrive Friday evenings and stay through Sunday, claiming my guest room like it was a hotel. I noticed she never brought flowers or wine like David's previous girlfriends had. She'd complain about my outdated furniture and suggest improvements that would cost thousands of dollars. When I served meals, she'd photograph her plate for social media, but barely eat anything. The engagement announcement came during Christmas dinner 2015. David proposed right there at my dining room table, presenting a ring I knew cost more than my monthly salary. Stephanie squealed appropriately and immediately started planning their wedding. I was happy for them truly, but something about her enthusiasm felt performative rather than genuine. Still, this was David's choice, and I trusted his judgment completely. The small wedding ceremony took place 6 months later at a downtown venue I'd never heard of. Stephanie's family flew in from California, bringing their obvious wealth and subtle disapproval of our more modest circumstances. During the reception, her mother asked pointed questions about my little house and whether David planned to upgrade soon. I smiled politely while silently wondering what she meant. After their honeymoon in Europe, a trip I knew David couldn't afford on his salary alone, they announced their temporary move into my house. "Just until we can save up properly," Stephanie explained, though her tone suggested this was already decided rather than requested. David looked apologetic but hopeful. How could I say no to my newly married son? The changes started immediately. Stephanie arrived with multiple suitcases and boxes of belongings that somehow required reorganizing my entire living room. My comfortable reading chair got moved to make room for her modern desk setup. Family photos from the mantelpiece disappeared into storage to make space for her minimalist decorative pieces. When I gently mentioned feeling attached to certain arrangements, she smiled brightly and said, "Don't worry, Gloria. I have such great ideas to make this place really shine." David seemed oblivious to my growing discomfort. He'd come home from work to find Stephanie rearranging furniture and praise her amazing eye for design. When I tried discussing the changes with him privately, he'd say, "Mom, you've had the same setup for years. A little freshening up never hurt anyone." His dismissive tone stung more than I wanted to admit. The kitchen became Stephanie's next project. She complained constantly about my ancient appliances and inefficient layout. She'd order takeout rather than cook, claiming my pots and pans were too heavy and my spice selection too basic. When friends visited, she'd apologize for the dated kitchen, like it was something embarrassing, rather than the heart of our home, where David and I had shared thousands of meals. Dinner parties appeared on my calendar without consultation. Stephanie would invite her work colleagues and college friends over for elaborate evenings that required me to deep clean beforehand and disappear discreetly afterward. I'd retreat to my bedroom listening to laughter from my own living room while feeling like an unwelcome guest. David participated enthusiastically, playing host in a way that suggested he'd forgotten whose house we were actually in. My morning routine suffered the most dramatic disruption. I'd always enjoyed coffee on the front porch while reading the newspaper, but Stephanie declared the porch furniture embarrassing and moved it to the garage. She replaced my comfortable wicker chairs with sleek metal pieces that looked stylish but felt cold and unwelcoming. When I mentioned missing my old setup, she suggested I could adapt to more sophisticated tastes. The final straw of this phase came when I discovered she'd changed all my streaming service passwords without telling me. I'd come home from a difficult shift at the hospital, looking forward to unwinding with my favorite shows, only to find myself locked out of accounts I'd been paying for years. When I asked David about it, he said Stephanie was organizing our household technology and promised to give me the new passwords later. That later never came. Summer brought escalating tensions I couldn't ignore anymore. Stephanie had appointed herself household manager, creating systems for everything from grocery shopping to television schedules. She posted handwritten notes around the house outlining optimal usage times for various rooms and appliances. The bathroom schedule particularly rankled me since I'd been managing Fine alone for 6 years before their arrival. The Wi-Fi password incident revealed how deliberately I was being excluded. When I finally confronted David about internet access in my own home, he acted like I was overreacting. "Stephanie's just trying to create structure," he explained while typing the new password into my tablet. "She's really good at organizing." I wanted to point out that my home had functioned perfectly well without her organizational skills, but his defensive posture warned me off. Their whispered conversations stopped whenever I entered rooms. I'd catch fragments about space issues and privacy concerns before they'd switch to discussing weather or work topics. The paranoid feeling of being discussed behind my back in my own home created constant anxiety. I started avoiding common areas except when absolutely necessary. The knock before entering rule pushed me over my limit. Stephanie announced it during breakfast one Tuesday morning like she was reading a corporate policy memo. "Gloria, would you mind knocking before coming into the living room or kitchen when David and I are spending time together? We just need some couple privacy, you know." David nodded agreement without meeting my eyes. I was being asked to knock before entering my own kitchen. My accidental eavesdropping on Stephanie's phone call happened while I was watering plants on the back patio. Her voice carried clearly through the open window as she complained to someone about living with his mother being absolutely impossible and how she acts like she owns everything just because her name is on some old paperwork. The casual dismissal of my legal ownership stunned me into silence. The home office takeover came next. Stephanie announced she'd be working remotely 3 days a week and needed David's old bedroom converted into professional space. Without asking my permission, they moved all his childhood belongings into storage and transformed the room with the expensive desk, professional lighting, and soundproofing materials. I wasn't consulted about any modifications to my property. Silence became mandatory during her work hours. No television, no music, no phone conversations above whisper level. I felt like I was tiptoeing through my own home, afraid to disturb her important business calls. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd demanded privacy while simultaneously controlling every sound I made throughout the house. My bout with bronchitis in late August triggered their most unreasonable demands yet. The coughing fits were worst at night, and despite my efforts to muffle them with pillows, Stephanie complained bitterly about sleep disruption. She suggested I sleep in the basement until the cough cleared up, to avoid disturbing their rest. David supported this idea, adding that the basement could be fixed up nicely for me. The basement conversion conversation happened over dinner, like they were discussing vacation plans. They'd researched costs for adding a bathroom and kitchenette downstairs, essentially creating a separate apartment where I could live independently while they enjoyed the main house. David presented this as a generous solution that would give everyone more space and privacy. The fact that they'd made detailed plans for relocating me in my own home without asking my opinion first revealed exactly how little my feelings mattered to them. My refusal sparked their first direct confrontation with me. Stephanie's mask of politeness finally slipped as she demanded to know why I was being so difficult about a perfectly reasonable solution. David joined her attack, questioning whether I was really thinking about what's best for everyone involved. I was being lectured about compromise in my own home by two people who'd never compromised on anything. The fighting escalated over the following weeks. Every conversation became an opportunity for them to present new arguments about why I should relocate to accommodate their needs. They tag-teamed me with logical explanations about space utilization and family dynamics as if I was a problem to be solved rather than the homeowner trying to live peacefully in her own space. Everything changed the morning David requested our private conversation. His serious expression and formal tone immediately put me on guard. We sat in my own living room while he explained that he and Stephanie had been doing some research and found solutions for our current situation. The clinical language felt deliberately distancing, like he was conducting a business meeting rather than talking to his mother. The assisted living facility brochures hit me like a physical blow. Glossy pamphlets featuring smiling seniors in carefully staged activities advertising independent living for active adults and freedom from household maintenance responsibilities. David's voice became mechanical as he recited benefits like scheduled meals, organized activities, and people your own age to socialize with. Each selling point felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. My brain struggled to process what was happening. This was my house, purchased with my money, legally owned by me alone. Yet my son was sitting there explaining why I needed to leave it for my own good. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd experienced, including Robert's death. At least that had been an accident, not a calculated decision to abandon me. Stephanie's entrance felt choreographed. She carried a manila folder containing research about various senior communities, complete with pricing comparisons and amenity lists. Her presentation was polished and thorough, clearly practiced beforehand. She spoke about quality of life improvements and age-appropriate social opportunities, like I was incapable of managing my own social needs. The timeline revelation was the cruelest part. They needed my decision by the end of the month because they'd already identified properties to tour and wanted to move forward efficiently. I realized this conversation wasn't seeking my input, but informing me of decisions already made. They expected compliance, not discussion. David's attempt at emotional manipulation came when I questioned their reasoning. "Mom, you know we love you, but Stephanie and I need space to start our own family. You'll be so much happier around people who understand what you're going through." The implication that I was going through something requiring special understanding rather than simply living in my own home revealed how completely they'd reframed the situation in their minds. Stephanie's ultimatum was delivered with business-like efficiency. "We really need this resolved quickly, Gloria. The longer we wait, the fewer options you'll have at the better facilities." She was creating artificial urgency around my displacement, as if delayed decision-making would somehow work against my interests rather than theirs. That night, I lay awake staring at ceiling I'd painted myself 7 years earlier. Every room held memories of the life I'd built through decades of hard work and sacrifice. David's first steps happened on the hardwood floors I'd refinished by hand. His graduation party filled the backyard where I'd planted every flower and shrub. This wasn't just property to me, it was the physical manifestation of everything I'd accomplished as a single mother. The next morning brought their formal presentation of options. They'd prepared a comparison chart of 3 senior communities, complete with monthly costs and move-in timelines. David handled the financial breakdown while Stephanie discussed lifestyle benefits, functioning as a sales team, trying to close a reluctant customer. The professional approach to dismantling my life felt surreal and deeply hurtful. Their assumption of my agreement was perhaps the most insulting part. Stephanie mentioned having already put a deposit on your room at Sunset Manor, like this was a done deal, requiring only my signature for completion. They'd spent my money without permission to secure housing I'd never agreed to accept. The level of presumption was breathtaking. When I looked into David's eyes that morning, I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. The boy I'd raised to be independent and strong had become someone who'd discard his own mother for convenience. All those years of sacrifice and support had created a man who felt entitled to my home and dismissive of my feelings. The person sitting across from me bore no resemblance to the child I'd loved and nurtured through his darkest moments. My calm response clearly surprised them both. Instead of the emotional breakdown they expected, I simply said, "I understand your position. Let me think about everything you've presented." The disappointment on their faces revealed they'd anticipated resistance they could argue against, not reasonable consideration of their demands. My first phone call went to James Thompson, a family law attorney who'd handled Robert's estate years earlier. Thompson listened patiently as I explained the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions about property ownership and residency arrangements. His assessment was immediate and reassuring. "Gloria, you own that house outright. No one can force you to leave your own property, family, or otherwise." The legal research phase energized me more than anything had in months. Thompson explained tenant rights, eviction procedures, and property owner protections with clarity that cut through my emotional confusion. I learned that David and Stephanie were essentially tenants in my home, subject to the same laws as any other residents. More importantly, I had absolute authority to terminate their residency with proper notice. My behavior during this period required careful acting. I continued responding to their pressure with non-committal phrases like, "I'm still considering all the options," while secretly consulting lawyers and researching legal procedures. They interpreted my compliance as acceptance, growing more relaxed about their timeline and demands. Watching their interactions during this time proved illuminating. Stephanie had already ordered new furniture for the living room, clearly expecting my departure soon. David spent evenings planning kitchen renovations he wanted to complete. Once Mom moves out, they discussed paint colors and flooring options with excitement that revealed how little they valued my presence or feelings about my own home. The most painful discovery came when I overheard Stephanie telling her sister about finally getting the house to ourselves during a FaceTime call. She described plans for converting my bedroom into a home gym and my sewing room into a nursery for future children. They weren't just expecting me to leave, they were actively planning to erase all traces of my life from the property. David's increasing pressure about moving timelines showed how eager they were to finalize my departure. He'd bring up assisted living benefits during casual conversations, emphasizing how freeing it would be for me to escape household responsibilities. Each comment reinforced my growing conviction that they viewed me as a burden rather than the woman who'd made their current lifestyle possible. Thompson's guidance about eviction procedures provided the concrete action plan I needed. Colorado law required 30 days written notice for month-to-month tenancy termination, regardless of family relationships. I could legally reclaim my home with proper documentation and timeline adherence. For the first time in months, I felt powerful instead of powerless. The documentation gathering process revealed exactly how thoroughly I owned every aspect of my property. Original purchase documents, mortgage payment records, property tax receipts, homeowners insurance policies, everything bore my name alone. David appeared nowhere on any legal paperwork, despite his apparent assumption of ownership rights. My decision crystallized during a particularly condescending conversation about assisted living meal plans. David explained how I wouldn't need to worry about grocery shopping or cooking anymore, as if these were burdens rather than activities I enjoyed. The complete dismissal of my preferences and capabilities convinced me that preserving this relationship wasn't worth sacrificing my home and dignity. Preparation day began before dawn, with careful attention to my appearance. I chose my best navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to David's graduation, and spent extra time on hair and makeup. If this was going to be our final confrontation, I wanted to face it looking strong and confident rather than defeated. Thompson had prepared the eviction documents with legal precision. 30-day notice to quit possession, citing termination of month-to-month tenancy without cause. The language was formal and final, leaving no room for argument or negotiation. I'd practiced reading it aloud until my voice remained steady throughout the entire text. The family meeting request brought them both to the living room with expectant faces. David carried a notepad, apparently ready to take notes about my assisted living preferences. Stephanie had her phone positioned to record my final answer, probably planning to document my agreement for legal purposes later. Their expressions shifted from anticipation to confusion as I placed the legal documents on the coffee table between us. David picked up the papers slowly, his face changing as he read the formal language. "What is this, Mom?" His voice carried disbelief mixed with growing panic. My explanation was calm and measured, delivered without emotion or apology. "This is your formal 30-day notice to vacate my property. You have until the 15th of next month to find alternative housing arrangements." The words felt powerful in my mouth, each syllable representing reclaimed authority over my own life. Stephanie's explosion was immediate and predictable. "You can't do this! This is our home too! We have rights!" Her voice rose to near screaming as she realized their carefully constructed plans were crumbling. The entitled outrage confirmed every suspicion I developed about her true character during these months of manipulation. The property deed presentation silenced her protests effectively. I spread the legal documents across the table, pointing out my name in black ink on every signature line. "This house belongs to me completely," I stated clearly. "You are tenants here, nothing more, and I'm terminating your tenancy." David's attempt at emotional manipulation felt desperate and hollow. "Mom, how can you do this to your own son? Don't you love me anymore?" The questions revealed how little he understood about love versus enabling. True love required respecting boundaries, not exploiting relationships for personal gain. My response cut through his manipulation cleanly. "David, I love you enough to have raised you to be independent and strong. But I love myself too much to let you treat me like an obstacle in my own home." The words felt liberating, representing years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. Stephanie's threat about legal action demonstrated her continued failure to understand the situation. "We'll fight this. We have tenant rights." Thompson had prepared me for exactly this response. I calmly explained that tenant rights included proper notice before eviction, which I was providing but nothing more. The power dynamic shift was immediate and dramatic. For months they'd treated me like a problem to be managed, but suddenly I held all the cards. They couldn't argue with legal documents or challenge property ownership they'd never possessed. Their assumed authority evaporated in the face of actual legal reality. Their hurried exit to consult their own attorney provided temporary quiet for me to absorb what had happened. I'd stood up to both of them simultaneously and emerged victorious. The scared, displaced feeling that had dominated recent months was replaced by satisfaction and renewed confidence in my own judgment. The following weeks brought various attempts at negotiation and manipulation. David tried appealing to our history together, while Stephanie alternated between threats and attempts at reconciliation. I remained firm in my position, responding to all overtures with references to the legal notice and move-out timeline. Lock changes and password updates marked the beginning of reclaiming my space. I hired a locksmith the next morning and changed every entry point to the house. Wi-Fi passwords, streaming services, and security codes all got reset to my specifications alone. For the first time in months, I controlled access to my own home. Moving day arrived with surprising efficiency. David had secured a small apartment across town, while Stephanie returned temporarily to her parents in California. I watched from my front window as they loaded boxes and furniture, feeling relieved rather than sad about their departure. The heavy atmosphere of recent months lifted with their removal. Our final conversation happened on the front porch as David carried his last boxes to the moving truck. He apologized for how everything got so complicated, but stopped short of taking responsibility for the hurt they'd caused. I accepted his apology while making clear that rebuilding trust would require genuine recognition of how they'd treated me. The first month alone felt like emerging from a long, suffocating tunnel into fresh air and sunshine. I moved my reading chair back to its original position by the window and returned family photos to their proper places throughout the house. Each restoration felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been temporarily lost. My book club friends noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. Martha commented that I seemed lighter somehow, while Susan said I looked more like yourself again. I realized how much stress I'd been carrying during those months of feeling unwelcome in my own home. The relief of restored autonomy was profound and energizing. Volunteering at Denver General's pediatric ward provided new purpose and connection. Working with young patients reminded me of David's childhood and helped heal some of the hurt from our recent conflict. These children needed advocacy and comfort roles I could fill effectively while processing my own family disappointment. The support group that developed naturally among my book club friends became invaluable for emotional healing. 3 other women had experienced similar situations with adult children who'd developed entitlement attitudes about parental resources. Sharing stories and strategies helped normalize my experience while providing practical advice for moving forward. David's occasional text messages were polite but distant, usually focusing on practical matters rather than personal connection. He'd ask about mail delivery or inform me about address changes, but avoided discussing feelings or relationship repair. The formal tone revealed how much damage our confrontation had caused to our bond. Stephanie's absence felt like a blessing, rather than a loss. Without her constant criticism and demands, I rediscovered joy in my daily routines. Morning coffee on the porch became peaceful again, and I could watch television or listen to music whenever the mood struck, without worrying about disturbing anyone. Home improvement projects I'd postponed during their residency became sources of satisfaction and creativity. I hired contractors to update the master bathroom and refinish the hardwood floors according to my preferences alone. Each improvement represented investment in my own comfort rather than compromise with ungrateful residents. Financial freedom returned as household expenses dropped dramatically. Without supporting 2 additional adults, I could afford small luxuries that had been impossible during recent months. Weekend trips to visit college friends, nice dinners out, and shopping for items I wanted rather than needed became regular pleasures. The healing process taught me important lessons about the difference between love and enabling. For years, I'd confused supporting David with giving him everything he wanted. True love sometimes required saying no and maintaining boundaries, even when it caused temporary conflict or disappointment. My growing circle of friends included women who'd learned similar lessons through various life challenges. We supported each other through family conflicts, health scares, and major life transitions with wisdom earned through experience. These relationships felt more authentic and reciprocal than the one-sided dynamic I'd maintained with David for too long. Legal ownership of my property became a source of pride rather than simply practical necessity. I'd worked hard to achieve homeownership as a single mother, and protecting that achievement required strength I hadn't known I possessed. Standing up for myself had been scary, but ultimately empowering. The house renovation project I'd dreamed about for years finally became reality. Kitchen updates, fresh paint throughout, and landscaping improvements transformed my space into exactly what I wanted it to be. Every choice reflected my taste and preferences without requiring anyone else's approval or compromise. Reflection on the entire experience revealed how much personal growth had occurred through crisis. I'd discovered inner strength, learned to set healthy boundaries, and developed a stronger sense of self-worth than I'd ever possessed before. The painful process had ultimately made me a more confident and independent person. David's rare phone calls remained cordial but superficial. He'd update me about work developments or weather observations while carefully avoiding topics that might lead to deeper emotional discussion. The relationship existed in a state of suspended animation, neither hostile nor genuinely connected. My final assessment of the situation focused on lessons learned rather than regrets about outcomes. Sometimes the people you love most need firm boundaries to understand your value and worth. Silence and strategic action had proven more effective than pleading or arguing for respect I deserved automatically. The anniversary of their move out passed quietly, marked only by my recognition of how much happier and more peaceful my life had become. I'd chosen my own well-being over maintaining a relationship that diminished my dignity and ignored my needs. That choice had been difficult, but absolutely necessary for my long-term happiness and self-respect. Peace with my decision came through understanding that real love includes mutual respect and consideration. David had opportunities to choose differently throughout our conflict, but consistently prioritized his convenience over my comfort. I'd given him chances to repair our relationship through changed behavior, but he'd chosen to maintain his entitled attitude instead. True family members honor each other's boundaries and dignity rather than exploiting emotional connections for personal advantage. The home I'd fought to keep represented more than property. It symbolized my independent security and right to control my own life circumstances. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love involves saying no to people you care about most when their demands threaten your fundamental well-being and dignity. I'd learned that lesson at 63, but it was never too late to start protecting yourself from those who would take advantage of your generosity and love. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for yourself in your own home? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please give this video a like if it resonated with your experience, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when family relationships become complicated. Share this with someone who might need encouragement to protect their own boundaries and dignity. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve respect in your own space, no matter who asks you to give it up. May you find the courage to choose yourself when others won't choose you first.